Welcome everyone, Shalom Aleichem, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to our esteemed professor, Professor Shai Secunda, who is joining us from Professor Secunda is teaching in the Bard College and is holding the Jacob Neuhauser chair. And he's an expert on the subject that he's going to be sharing himself with, his knowledge with us. And he has published 2 books on the subject, the Iranian Talmud, and the other book is called The Red Fence, I believe, right? Talmud. We would like to thank you for joining us, and it's a very big honor to have you. And on behalf of everyone, thank you very much.
Okay, again, ich will beten the oilem because the professor there, and the professor needs to leave 6:30 because he needs to get a train. So we want to be able to be kind as much as possible. I'll make sure to open the floor for questions, but questions can't come in the first few minutes. We need to start to hear something. And Hashem, anyone who's going to have a very important question, there's such a thing, pens, papers also. I don't know where the papers are, but you can write them back on this paper and write the question, and I'll try to accommodate. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And I hope I don't go against you when I say you should feel free to ask questions, but at the beginning, I'll just try to introduce what we'll be talking about and what we'll be learning, and then we'll have a good discussion. So it's a pleasure to be here, and it's always a pleasure to speak to people who can actually learn. A lot of times we in academia, even Jewish studies, are mainly talking to people who might be very smart and might know other areas of knowledge, but can't crack open a Gemara and make some sense of it. So it's a pleasure to be here. I also want to use this as an opportunity to take you into what I've been thinking about over the last number of years. The main project is really the title of my first book, which is the Iranian Talmud, or we can think of it as the Persian Talmud. Now, there's obviously no such thing as the Persian Talmud. When the book first came out, I had a friend who took a picture from the library in Bar Ilan, and a librarian had miscatalogued the book. They thought, okay, on one shelf we have the Talmud Yerushalmi, it's a very nice edition. Another shelf there was Oz Vahada or Talmud Bavli, and then she put the Iranian Talmud right next to it. This is the third Talmud that we never knew about. Now the point of calling it the Iranian Talmud is not to say that I found another Talmud, but rather because I came to the conclusion, and the person I studied with, Yaakov Elman, Zechron Levracha.
Give us a few words on Yaakov Elman, people.
Oh, I can't say a few words. Rabbi Yaakov Elman, does anyone here know, or did anyone know Rabbi Elman? He was an extremely special person, lived actually in Flatbush for many years, and came to Jewish studies, academic Jewish studies, very late in life. Haredi guy. He did a lot of different things. He ran one of the best bookstores that used to exist on the Lower East Side. Rabinowitz, I don't know if anyone remembers Rabinowitz books. This is like very long time ago. He was a weatherman for a while, working for the meteorology department. He got interested in Akkadian, an ancient Semitic language, and then ultimately he did a PhD with Larry Schiffman. But just from what I'm telling you can understand that he was always a mavakish. He was always seeking and looking and thinking. And he was always bothered by the fact, even when he started in academic Jewish studies, and he learned some of the great thinkers of the 20th century. Saul Lieberman is one big name. And Shaul Lieberman had devoted his life to trying to better understand things like the Yerushalmi and Medrash and everything from Eretz Yisrael by looking at what we know about the context. He'd read Greek things, sometimes he'd read Latin texts, and he solved a lot of problems, and he illuminated the text in a new way. But Yaakov Elman was very bothered. That's very good for when you're talking about Eretz Yisrael, but what about when you're talking about Bavli? how will we better understand Bavel? And when I first came to study with him in Yeshiva University, he was himself on a new journey. He had written a book about the relationship between the Tosefta and the Bavli. That's why I wanted to study with him. I was very interested in this question about the Brises and the Bavli and how they relate to the Tosefta. And he said, you could do that, you could write a PhD on that, but come along for the ride, and I did. And unfortunately, he was in a terrible car accident, and it took a few years, but ultimately he passed away some 4 years ago, 5 years ago now. But in many ways, everything that I've been able to do in this field is really a testament to Rabbi Elman Zichrono Livracha. So the question is, right, what kinds of things can we use to better understand the Bavli if we're interested in the context? And also, there's a historical question. What was it like? What was it like to be a Jew in Bavel? What was it like to be one of the Amoraim in Bavel during the time where the Bavli was put together? Did they see themselves as, were they aware even of the empire that they were living under? Does anyone know the name of the empire? Sasanian Empire. Were they aware of the Sasanian Empire? Did they see a connection between the kings that ruled over them and the kings that had ruled over Jews more or less in that part of the world in the past? I think the answer is yes, and I want to start with the Gemara that shows that they saw a sense of continuity and connection between their life situation and the life situation of Jews many, many centuries before. The first Gemara is a very well-known Gemara, and the question is, why don't we say Hallel on Purim? I mean, it would seem to have all of the features of what you need to have a chiyuv to say Hallel. So the question is, right? I mean, even to strengthen it, right? My darash Rabbi Chia bar Avin, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, Umam Yavdus Lecheros, Sabrin and Shira, Mimisa Lechaim Lo Kol Shekei. It's obvious. It's a very dramatic. It seems even more dramatic than Yetzias Mitzrayim. They're not just slaves and enslaved, but they're actually and going free. But they were almost annihilated, and now they're free. Yachi Hallel Nami Nema. So the first answer is Lefisha Omrim Hallel Al Neish B'chutz La'aretz. That's already, by the way, an insight into how they thought about their situation, especially versus the Chachamim in Eretz Yisrael. They had a sense that we're different. It's a different life situation. But the thing I want to go down to, I mean, it's a wonderful Gemara. One of the famous sheets is Rav Nachman, 2 lines from the bottom, Kriyasa Zu Alila. Maybe actually we do say Hallel. We say Hallel just in a different way, which is by leading the Megillah. It doesn't, but Rava is the line I'm interested in. Rava says, Bishlam HaHasam, meaning by Yetzias Mitzrayim, Hallelu Avdei Hashem, Velo Avdei Paro. There's a clean break. The Jews left Egypt. In fact, we're not supposed to go back to Egypt. The Egyptians are drowned in the sea. It's over, right? It was terrible, centuries of slavery, done. And that's why we're overjoyed when we say Hallel. But Hallelu Avdei Hashem, Hallelu Avdei Achashverosh, can we really say Hallelu Avdei Hashem, Hallelu Achashverosh? Was there really a clean break? Fine, this guy named Achashverosh is dead. Okay. But his progeny, his children, his children's children are still alive. Rava says, Akati avadei de Achashverosh anan. We're still servants of Achashverosh. Obviously, Rava knows that Achashverosh hadn't lived for centuries. He's saying that the kings, at least my reading of the Gemara, maybe it's a little taking it a bit far, but he's saying the kings that are ruling over us right now are a new form of Achashverosh. And in fact, quite literally, the Sasanian Empire did have a connection to the empire that Achashverosh was a part of. Sometimes we call them the Achaemenid Empire. They came from a similar part of Iran, and they ruled over a huge area of the Near East, even including Eretz Yisrael. So we're thinking people like Koresh and Daryavesh, right? And then we have a break. I don't know if there are any history mavens here, but who put an end to the Persian Empire? Does anyone know? Greeks, and specifically Alexander, right? We're gonna encounter Alexander in just a bit. He put an end to this. Then there was a break because there was Greek rule. There was a new empire from another part of Iran, the Parthians. And then the Sasanians more or less came from the same area, near the Persian Gulf, came and became emperors and ruled over the whole place. Where was their winter capital? Where was their main site of power? Actually in Bavel. It was right in the heart of Bavel. And in fact, where did Rava live? Rava's the one who says,
Prison.
okay, where is that? That's actually part of, you can think of the metropolitan area, right? We call it, sometimes it's known as Tesiphon. Tesiphon, which appears in the Gemara actually a couple of times. He lived right next to the heart of Persian power. So he knew what he was talking about when he said, Akati avadidi Achashverosh Anan. Now, you can look at other groups of Jews that were living during that time. I wish this picture came out a little bit better, but it's actually an amazing thing, and maybe I'll send you a color picture you can see. It's amazing. Does anyone know what Dura Europos is? That's where this comes from. It's in Syria. It was the synagogue that...
one picture you didn't bring down there on the horse.
It's there. You just can't see the horse. It's just blurry. All the way... Let's actually talk about what's in the picture. So first of all, this is from a synagogue that was built and decorated in the 3rd century. Sometime, this already existed sometime in the 250s, maybe 240s. And, yeah, there it is. I don't need to see it, other people. That's the beautiful image. It's actually, it was a major discovery, because until that point, first of all, when this was discovered by Yale professors, archaeologists, in the 1930s, we did not have that many Bati Knesset from Eretz Yisrael that had been excavated. So there was the sense that Jews don't really decorate their shuls. It's very simple and very plain, and they're not thinking about anything else. And actually, there's an amazing description of this. The lead archaeologist from Yale, he describes the feeling of when he must have been in an accident on a train. That the train is rushing and all of a sudden it stops and everyone flies to the front, and it's just utter shock. He said when he started digging, and it had been protected for centuries by sand, so that everything was just as vivid as you can see in those pictures, he realized, oh my gosh, Jews, not only do they, appreciate and find meaning in pictures, but they also are pretty good at depicting art. Now, part of what's interesting about these pictures is not only are they, almost all of them, virtually all of them are pictures from Tanakh. Different stories. There's a famous, amazing picture of Yecheskel with the vision of the dry bones, and you have the limbs that are sort of coming back together. There's a famous picture of Basya and Moshe. This picture is not just another picture, but it was right next to the Aron Kodesh, right where the niche was, where they had the Aron Kodesh. This picture is to the side. Now, the pictures don't only show us that Jews could appreciate good art, but also it gives you a sense of how they understood the stories and midrashim and everything. So again, I'll just tell you what's here because it's a little blurry. On the left, actually, we have a man on the horse who's wearing very nice clothes, royal clothes, a white horse. He's being led by a guy who's dressed like a stable help, Persian. And then you have in the middle a bunch of figures. We don't really know what they're doing exactly. They're making some kind of sign of approval. And they're dressed like Greeks, right? You can see the togas. They're dressed like Greeks. All the way on the side, you have a king. He's sitting on some kind of throne. You have a person who either is receiving or probably handing a letter to the king. You have all kinds of courtiers, and then you have a woman all the way on the right, who's almost certainly Esther, who's sitting, wearing also fancy clothes and sitting on some kind of chair next to the king. Okay, so what are the scenes? The one on the left is easier to figure out. What's the scene on the left? See, everyone's quiet. You scared everybody. No one wants to open the. Okay, so it's Mordechai is on the house. Is on the horse. He's dressed actually exactly. If you just go to the saddle, he's dressed in the very same clothes as the king. Okay, that makes sense of the story. Big Day Malchus. He's also, though, he's led by a person who's dressed like a stable boy, meaning it gives you a little more insight into the story. It's not just that that Mordechai is wearing the king's clothes, but Haman is so debased that he's even wearing the lowly clothes. There's a famous medrash appears in the Bavli at the end of the first paragraph of Megillah and elsewhere that explains it's not just that Mordechai is raised up, but Haman was debased, right? He was demoted, and that is visually depicted very nicely. On the other side, it's not clear exactly, but there's some kind of message that's being exchanged with the king. But the thing that interests many people and that I want to highlight are what are those people, what are they so happy about? What are they approving? What are they thrilled with in what they're seeing? Again, they're wearing Greek clothing, and they seem to be showing approval to what's going on in the picture to the side of them. So there's as an art historian named Shalom Sabar, who offers the following possibility. He says, let's think geography. This is in Syria. And during the time when the shul was built, it was under Roman rule. Who was the Romans' main enemy? The Persians, the Sasanians, right? There were wars that were fought for centuries between the Romans and the Sasanians.
If I understand good, this shul is a shul from Jewish soldiers.
Correct.
Jewish soldiers.
Jewish soldiers, exactly. Du Europus is like a military garrison town, but it wasn't just temporary. I mean, they built like it was proper. But you're right, they're invested on the Roman side. Exactly. And how do we have these pictures? Why were they preserved? Well, actually, because the whole shul was filled up with sand during the assault where the Romans ultimately were defeated and the Persians came in. Now, we're going to see it's a little bit more complicated than that. But his theory is that Jews living on the Roman side said, we're not servants of Achashverosh, we're actually on the Roman side, right? Think about this. You have two options. You can either be under the Romans or the Persians in Gullus during that time in that place. So we're on the Roman side, and we are very happy to see this debasing of this Persian, of this man. Yeah.
Gemara seems to refer at that period to the early period as the Greek period. The Gemara says we were under the Greeks, so they call the earlier kingdom the Greeks.
Where do you see what
Rav says in the Bava
It used to be different times. Amul Gevein, Hantas do the Sikh, Bimaya.
Yeah, that's right.
Before this was the Greeks.
Right,
So they refer to the earlier period of the Persians as the Greeks.
That's talking about it's roughly
255, roughly 255. I don't think it's.
Maybe it's 100 years before.
It's a very interesting Gemara, which
it seems to like the Russian Jews used to call the Russian Empire Greeks. They used to call the
You're right,
Empire
though.
Greek.
But that Gemara is not talking about the Sasanians. It's talking
they're
actually.
speaking before, so they're living.
They're talking about the Parthians. You're right.
So
the Parthians they did consider to be Greek, but here we're not doing the Parthians. We're already under the Sasanians. And what Shalom Sabar, but the point I make is that Shalom Sabar says that maybe that originally when they made this picture, what they were thinking was we're not the Megillah story, the Purim story is also not in the past. Similar to Rav in one way, we can still kind of identify with the story because look, we're approving, but we're not there. We're on the other side, and look at these Persians. They're nothing. Well, the Persians had other ideas, and they ended up defeating.
quite often they used a Goyish artisan that was familiar with fresco or whatever.
Yes. So that's a very interesting point, and we don't know who the artists were. Certainly in the Middle Ages, we're pretty sure that a lot of the beautiful illuminated manuscripts that you see were Christian artists that were trained to
it looks
depict
like
things.
Byzantine.
And so some of it is very similar to what we find in there was a church that was also in the same town, so the same style you find there, but we don't really know. It could have been Jews who were trained, or it could have been non-Jews who. Either way, it doesn't matter, because it seems that the messages are there was a dialogue with the community. So it's like you hire, a Goyish muralist to make some kind of picture in your house. It's your okay. So that's maybe what the picture is doing, but there was graffiti, right, or an inscription of a visit that I want to point out on number 3. Even before the Persians destroyed this town, they sent some messengers, and they developed some kind of relationship with the Jewish community. And they say, this is what it says: in the month of Mir, on the year 14, there should actually be Shapar the first. That's a mistake. Shmor Malka, right? Around 255. So there's this Hormuz, the scribe, and the Kardag, which is some kind of official of the district, and the pious scribe. They came to this district of the Jews. By the way, already interesting that they understand this is the Jewish part of a very mixed city, but there was a Jewish section. To this place of worship of the God of gods of the Jews. By the way, you can hear echoes of the way of, right, not just the God, but the God of gods, okay? They saw this, again, this is written by the non-Jews who came to visit. They saw this painting, they saw in light, unfortunately there are a few words missing. So what does this tell us? Whatever the original intention of the picture was, the Jews had to think fast. They had to say, look, there's continuity here. They dress in this Persian way. These are, and they probably told a bunch of Baba Mises about what's going on in this picture. My point is, though, that not only the Chachamim in Bavel, right, not only the Amoraim, the Jews of that entire region were trying to come to terms with what it meant to be under the rule, in the shadow, right, of the Persian Empire. Rava said, this is what it is. We're still servants of Achashverosh. That even has maybe halachic implications, right? We're not going to be able, or at least an explanation why we don't say Hal on Megillah, on Purim. But also, as we're going to see, we need to take into account the fact that we're in the Persian side and not the Roman side, we'll see soon. Yeah.
I'm saying, like a little bit drush, Akata Avda Achashverosh, because Rava is explaining why, when Chazal were masakin the Megillah, why then they weren't masakin Halva. It's not in Rob's time. It's not. You're like explaining it like he's reflecting on his time. Sure.
But they're not looking in that Gemara for signs that, if I remember correctly, that the Megillah is Mechayev or not Mechayev.
No, they're asking why didn't the Chachamim Mechayev Halal? Every Yom Tov you say Halal. Why didn't you say Halal?
Yeah.
So, trying to say.
No.
Okay.
I see. I still hear echoes in the phrase, right? That he's talking about us, right? Us is where I'm living in the 4th century. But you're right, they are trying to understand what's going on centuries ago when they first established Purim. You're right. Okay, so I want to look at a few Gemaras that...
in between they were in their own country,
I mean, they were and they weren't. So there's a question of where the Jews in Bavli came from. Not everyone went back. And where all the Chachamim, did all of them come from?
Saying how for Hanukkah happened 200 years later or whatever.
But in Eretz Yisrael, and again, even though there was no, it's interesting, there was no clean break. There's still, they're dealing with the Goyish authorities, but... right, they didn't identify after that with the original.
I think what Rava is saying, how right Chazal were back then.
That's what he said.
Because we're still here now.
Yeah.
Because we're still here now.
Yeah.
Meaning, it's obviously, he said it
That's
then.
what Rabbi Yonis is saying.
Okay.
Okay. So I want to show you some of the ways that they reckoned with it. Specifically, first about kings. Right. Let's look at a few examples. Look at number 5 first. Okay. This is a very nice. It's a little Gemara in Bava Metzia. There's a whole machlokas there. Who do we paskin like? Do we paskin like Rabbi Shimon? Do we not paskin like Rabbi Shimon? Amar Ephraim Tamidu.
He's skipping 4, yeah?
We'll get back to 4. Amar Ephraim Tamidu Shreish Lakish Mishum Reish Lakish Halach Rabbi Shimon. Okay, it's just paskening like Rabbi Shimon. Amrua Kamei Shvor Malka. So they said this. They reported this in front of Shvor Malka, that the halacha in this sugya in Bava Metzia at the end about who has property rights over these plants to be growing. That halacha is like Rabbi Shimon. They say it in front of Shvor Malka. Remember Shvor Malka? We just heard about Shapor, right? Amar le zil namte afrin the Rabbi Shimon. Let's bring an afrin to Rabbi Shimon. So first of all, by the way, I just noticed on the way over, it's very nice because it's Ephraim. Reish Lakish, and the thing that they have him saying is afrin. Maybe this is one of those examples like Rabbi Zuama telling us Hilchas Ma'im Achorim. Maybe there's like a connection there between the name.
Rabbi Noah, we have it also.
Yeah. But what's he saying? What does afrin mean? Actually, Rashi tells us what it means. He says, I mean, he has a different etymology of where the word comes from. This is a good Persian word. It's a good Persian word that means something like praise, right? Blessing, praise. Let's bring praise to Rabbi Shimon. What does this Gemara reflect? Why would these Chachamim, first of all, report this to Shvor Malka? Why would they tell this story about reporting it to Shvor Malka? And why would Shvor Malka care? Why would they say that he cares about this very specific machlokes in the Mishnah at the end of Bava Metzia?
Not saying it happens. You're asking why would they imagine if
why would they tell this story? Whether or not it happened or not, that's less interesting to me. But even if we can prove one way or another, why would they? What's the investment of telling a story like this? So, what do you think? What are the possibilities?
Maybe it's property rules. I don't know.
It was his benefit, maybe his financial benefit.
Maybe the laws contradicted maybe the common laws, and they were trying to see if it fits. Right?
Okay, good. So one possibility is
What was the law that we're speaking about?
it's at the very end.
You
can like exactly. You can like the terrorist. You know, you can put your hand over and take. It's a very
Condo
specific
rules.
thing. Yeah, exactly. It's a very specific. I mean, maybe it's a very important area of law that you can make money from, but it's a very specific area of law. So one thing is maybe another very large sugya, which is worth looking at. We don't have time today. Is Din Mechusadina. Din Mechusadina also is formulated by who?
Shmuel. Shmuel Malka himself.
Who is exactly known as, nickname as Shvor Malka under the Persians, right? So when he's like Medina de Malchusadina, obviously it's a rule that's going to be applied for many centuries in different places, but initially it's talking about Persians. They have to work out, okay, what's Medina de Malchusadina? And actually, isn't it nice if sometimes we can make these two things work a little bit better? So even when it comes to the Imamanis, maybe we can sort of influence, right? This is one way of reading it. They want to we can lobby, right? We can try to get halacha to be accepted and kind of that kind of feedback loop. Another way of approaching it is they're invested in showing the kings as A, good people, and B, as appreciative, right, of halacha. In other words, it's not so much that they want to influence what Dinin Mechusa looks like, but they want the king to be sort of presented as someone who respects halacha, maybe even sees himself as something like a Goyish Chacham. There's another Gemara I didn't bring where Rav Huna refers to the fact that this says, don't bother me when I'm speaking. I'm like Shvor Malka Bedina. Right? So there are all different kinds of possibilities.
We see in a lot of Gemaras, a few Gemaras I think you bring in the book, that they, I don't know why, but they viewed King Shapur that he knew Jewish law, sometimes knowing, let's say by the Sigya of Kvura, that he asked them.
Well, there's a very specific thing. We'll get to that in a little bit.
But it looks like there's something. Why? I don't know why. Maybe you could explain.
Why this specific thing?
No, the rabbis that lives in Israel, they didn't view the Greek or the Romans as knowing Jewish
correct.
Torah or anything. But why did they view? And again, I don't know if this is historically true, but the way they viewed them, why? Because looks like they had some relationship more than the the Jews in
So I think it's they're trying to come to maybe they're trying to cultivate a better relationship, or maybe, as I suggested in the book, maybe they're familiar with Persian ways of thinking. On the one hand, they find their laws to be oppressive, right? Or stupid in certain Gemaras. Dina de Parsai is like pejorative. It's like
right.
I have a friend who's actually Arab who told me when I explained this to him in the book, he said, "Zakamo avodah aravit." Right, it's a way of saying shoddy work. So maybe the Persians, right? So, but on the other hand, if you open some of their works, there is a kind of legal thinking that is familiar. It looks familiar to somebody who knows about it. It's not clear, but they're still strategizing about how to understand the fact that they are within this context under the rule of these people.
Does Ephraim come up anywhere else?
I looked this up when I first worked in this, and I can't remember right now. I can't remember. Maybe not. Yeah.
And Persians had this big agenda to always present their kings as submitting in every region to the local culture, like from Cyrus. They played this game always. Even the little Malka of the Jews is also that.
Yeah.
Wherever they went, he would say that he came there and he gave the kabunas and he did it that
right,
way.
Rather than like ruling by force to kind of develop some
autonomy.
Also, like when he would supplement, they would like become like just like the leaders in their own church. It was also. That's how Persian.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, certainly way back with Cyrus and the way he
constantly tried to replay.
I agree. It's a different model than Hellenism. Hellenism, they want to make everyone part of this like shared thing, erase differences. Everyone will speak Greek. You're right. The Persians did try to.
He is the leader of the Jews also, Shabbat.
Yeah, it could be. Okay, let's look at another example quickly. This is number 4. We'll go back one. Here we see that there's even some kind of theological conversation, right? It's not just, look, the king is invested, cares, or we're trying to influence him about Dini Mamonos, but even in terms of theology, even in terms of like Jewish thought and what we think about the future. Again, Shmuel, right? Amritu Mashiach al Chamrasi. You say that Mashiach is going to come on a donkey. I mean, a donkey, right? A donkey. Asa ishterle susia barka deisli. Let me send him, right? Actually, I think we're missing. I don't know which. Oh yeah, let me send him. Let me send him a. By the way, that's a Persian word also. The barka. Let me send him a proper riding horse. It's not bekovatik to just come on a donkey. Obviously, he misses the whole point, but that's not what we have to do. Amrle. So Shmuel responds to him. Mi islach bar chiver gavni. Do you have a white or hazar in some manuscripts, which is 1,000? Do you have a
unicorn?
A unicorn, basically a unicorn. Now, what's going on in this conversation? What's happening? So, one way of reading it is like the minimalist way of reading it is it's very similar to other stories we have, like with Shmuel and Shmuel Malka. They have a good time together. So if there's in descriptions of the Simchas Beis HaShoeva and different Chachamim dancing with torches. So one of the examples is doing, having fun with these kings. That also is a statement that you can, I went and I had a beer with Bush or Trump. I don't know what. It shows like a certain confidence, but that's not enough. Why? Let's try to imagine. Why would a Persian king care about the way the Messiah comes? What's the investment? So one way is to say the kings are always worried. I mean, this was the big worry with the Romans. All these figures who are coming during the years leading up to the big Judean revolt, and they don't want problems. But he seems to be even more invested. He's like in the way the story is told. He's saying, "I'll do this, you'll do that." So, without going into great details, this is just an example of the kind of ways that they were coming to terms with the Persians. The Persians also have a messianic idea. Which religion were the Persian kings? Does anyone know? Zoroastrian. Right? So Zoroastrians are mainly known. The first fact people think of is that they're dualists. that they separate the world into good and evil. There's a good God and there's an evil God, and there's even a Gemara about that with the Meimar.
Started with Hermes, yeah.
Yeah, that's the name, exactly. The name of that scribe is, it's basically like meeting someone named Chris, right? The name of their God is Hormizd, and Hormizd is their good God. That's one part of it. But the other part is that there's a battle between good and evil, which takes place during part of the world, of world history, but ultimately it's going towards a messianic end. And the Persians wrote a ton about this question of what will the messianic age be like. They were very agitated by this question. So we could say that whether or not it's historical, the Jews were aware of Persian investment in this question, and they even thought maybe we should meddle in the way that the Jews are picturing the next world. So both of these examples are examples of what I would say positive interactions, sometimes a little bit too much. Personally, I don't like to discuss theology with non-Jews, but a little bit, positive interactions between Jews, the rabbis, and the kings. Number 6 is a stress point. This is where, and unfortunately, we still live in a world where you can imagine a conversation like this happening. You're dealing with a king who conquers, and he has military battles, and sometimes people on the other side that get killed are Jews. What do you do? Right? What do you do? You might personally feel bad, but you have to figure out how to react to what's happening. So this is a Gemara that's, it's in Moed Katan. It's about Kriya, and the question is, Umi Karina Shmuel Saros, do we actually, if it's not a Velas, do we actually tear for hearing bad news? Here's an example. Va'amru le l'Shmuel. They told Shmuel. Someone told Shmuel. Tal Shmuel Malka Tresar Alfi Yudai b'Mezigas Kesari. Really bad news. They told him that Shmuel Malka, the first against Shapor, the first, had killed 12,000 Jews in this place, which is in modern-day Turkey, in Asia Minor. Vilakara. And what was Shmuel's reaction? He didn't rip. So it sounds like, this is a classic example where, there's no, but in other words, they just observe his behavior. The fact that, where I went to yeshiva, there was always a story about how Ruderman at a bris did not reach for a certain orange juice. And that meant that orange juice, he didn't like the hashkacha, right? But here, right, he didn't rip. He should have ripped. He should have reacted in some way, and he didn't, if it's really true that you ripped for that case. Fine. Without going into details, let's go to the next line, where the Gemara asks, did this even happen? Is this even the case? Umi katal shavor malka Yudai. Did he really kill the Jews? Shmuel. We have a conversation that Shmuel Malka even had with Shmuel, which is, he said, Teisi li de la katli Yehudi me'olam. Give me respect. I never killed a Jew. So first of all, there's a stira here in the Gemara, right, which the Gemara is grappling with. On the one hand, we have the story that Shapur killed 12,000 Jews. For some reason, it seems that Shmuel didn't tear. On the other hand, we have the story that Shmuel Malka never told Shmuel that he never killed anyone. How do we solve this contradiction? Hasam inu garmilin avshayu. There, they brought it about themselves. Meaning it wasn't some kind of anti-Semitic attack. Out of nowhere, bolt out of the blue, Shmuel Malka decided he was going to go after them. No, the Jews who were living there brought it upon themselves because they were in the army, they were part of the military. Right, there was this saying that the sound of the bows of this place, Caesarea Mazaka, destroyed the walls of Laodicea. So in other words, they were involved in the battle. That's why Shmuel Malka killed them, and that's why Shmuel didn't tear Kriya. And so first of all, it's an amazing story that gives you an insight into, again, how to think through a situation where on the one hand, you want to keep a king on your side. You want the king to brag that he doesn't kill Jews. But on the other hand, Tachlis, he killed Jews. In fact, he killed a lot of them, and you have to sort of explain how and why. It might even, again, have halachic implications, depending on how you read the Gemara. Right, so you can see there that even when it came to the kings, it wasn't so easy. Okay. I now want to switch gears a little. We spoke about Persian kings, and I want to talk about the Zoroastrians that we mentioned before. The Zoroastrians and the Zoroastrian priests, they were dualists. They believed that the world could be divided into good and evil, and they were also in charge. And we had to deal with them. And this Gemara, there's a Gemara in Yevamos that...
Explain a little bit first, when I say they were in charge, explain. What does it mean in charge? There was the king, yeah? What was their relationship with the kingdom?
Okay, so the kings themselves, most of them consider themselves to be Zoroastrians, worshippers of this, good god Ahura Mazda, but not themselves the priests, not themselves involved in that cult. There was also a whole class of Persian priests. You might have Chabara, we're going to come across that room. Sometimes they're referred to as an Amgusha, which is a magus, exactly. So not really, the word magician actually comes from the word that's used for the Zoroastrian priests, but the reason is because the Greeks, who invented that word, so to speak, thought that the Zoroastrian priests were doing magic, right? But that doesn't seem to be exactly what's going on. The Zoroastrian priests were religious functionaries, but they also had official roles depending on the king within the bureaucracy. They might be in charge of certain courts. They might have power to make certain decisions. And in fact, one apparently very important Persian priest who lived in the 3rd century, who was very proud of everything he did. His name was Kurdir. He boasted and put it on a rock right next to where the Persian kings placed their images. Of all the things that he did, he built lots of fire temples. They worshipped fire because that was part of kind of the positive side of things. And he also persecuted all kinds of people. One of the groups of people that he refers to is Jews. Right? Jews show up there, different kinds of Christians show up there, Hindus show up there, even a new religion that was just founded in that century, Manichaeans show up there. All these different peoples, he was very proud that he persecuted. So it wasn't just that you have within the empire these priests who shared a religion with the kings, they had a lot of power. And one of the things that the Jews had to figure out how to do was, on the one hand, navigate in a very smart way, as we saw in those 3 cases, the relationship with the kings. Make sure, you have fun with them, and you affect how they do their laws. You even have to justify, maybe, some of the things that they've done. And then you have the priests, which, time after time in the Gemara, are depicted negatively as a big problem. And I want to let's look at this Gemara and see how it goes. Bugoy naval achisei, we have a pasuk from Devarim. What's being referred to in the future? What kind of goy naval? It's a whole discussion. I mean, if you look at Jewish history, you'll know there's been lots of navalim that have done bad things to us. Rabbi Yochanan, interestingly enough, right, from Eretz Yisrael. It's unclear why Rabbi Yochanan says this. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Elu Chabarim. What's Chabarim? What does that mean? What's a Chabara? Does anyone know why that would be a word that is used, as we're going to see? Exactly. There was an old association between another pasuk in Devarim that refers to different forms of prohibited activities, like an Ov and a Yidoni and all these oracles that they would consult. One of the people that was, you're not supposed to act in this way, is Chover Chaver. If you look actually at Onkelos uses the verb which was always associated with these people, which is Reish Tes Nun. They were mumblers. The reason why they were mumblers is they were constantly saying their prayers. Exactly. The Gemara refers to Ratna Dem Gusha, their mumblings. So this was a word this is actually only Jews use this word to refer to Zoroastrian priests. You don't find this among other groups. This was the word that they used. What was that?
Speaking in tongues.
Exactly. Something like speaking in tongues, a little bit different, but something like that. Yeah. Okay. So Amr le Rabbi Yochanan asu chabare leBavel. We have to. It's not clear what this means, but the chabare, this group, these Persian priests, came to Bavel. Shaga nafal. So he fell over. He was so disturbed and distressed by this news that he fell over. Amrulay. Then they told him, "Don't worry, makable shochta." They're not such big ideologues that they're just gonna engage in their persecution and terrible things. You can pay them off. Taretz Yosef. So he sat up straight. He realized, if there's a will, there's a way. We're going to figure it out. Okay. So the first thing I want to just raise is what's happening historically here. What does it mean that they came to Bavel? And I don't have a solution, by the way, for why this is Rabbi Yochanan. Yochanan is in
Unless
Tiberia.
we're not talking about Zoroastrian priests. Maybe we're talking about a different cult, a Christian cult that came from...
But in other Gemaras it becomes clear that Chavara is...
like fire, Hanukkah.
Yeah, in other Gemaras it's clear that this is a word that's used.
Maybe
some kind of...
Maybe they were scared, so they said, "Oh, but like so a rabbi in Israel said, not we are telling."
That's
you."
an interesting idea. In other words, they want to like deflect.
On the flag without telling that they're saying it.
It could be. I mean, also as much as Rabbi Yochanan is very, very not only lived in Eretz Yisrael but was very associated with Eretz Yisrael, he had because so many people from Bavel learned with him, he had a real interest in what was happening in Bavel. So it is possible, right? And we have many stories where Rabbi Yochanan, talks to people from Bavel. Sometimes it makes fun of them, but he's engaged with Bavel. It's not just this foreign place that he doesn't know. Anyway, what about coming to Bavel? What does it mean they came to Bavel? So one theory is that they came to power. You remember I referred to those different empires. We had the Achaemenids, then the Alexander the Great came and destroyed the Achaemenids, then you had the Parthians. It was specifically under the Sasanians that the Zoroastrian priests, maybe not physically came there, but rose to power. So this is not, right, he's referring to a new change which had recently had happened. Remember, Rabbi Yochanan is only a couple of decades after they came to power. So this is what his concern is. Okay, that's the first thing. Look at the next line of Gemara. Gazru al shalosh b'shvil shalosh. Gazru al basar mipnei matanos. Gazru al merchatzos mipnei tevila. Kamachatete shachve mipnei shesmechim biyom edam. Okay. This is an interesting list. So now we hear, you never have anything like this said about the kings. The kings don't make any gezeros that are bad for the Jews, and even when they do things that seem that they hurt Jews, they figure out a way to understand it differently. Here, we're talking about the Zoroastrian priests, and they make gezeros, right? What are the three gezeros? And I want to show you how you can read these gezeros on two different levels at the same time. The first one is they make a gezerah on meat. Maybe that means they ban the slaughtering of meat, right? So you can't even do shchita. Unfortunately, we also know about that today. Why do they do that? B'pnei matanos. What would that mean? First of all, manos kahuna. This is one of actually the Gemaras that's proof that even after Chavar Bayis, there still is this practice that you're supposed to give the parts of the animal to the kohanim. Okay, so that's the first thing. Now, so what does that mean?
Another reason.
But what does that mean? That for one reason, right? They make a gezerah because of another thing. What's going on?
That they want to ban. They don't want.
Because they're not giving it for them, they're giving it for their
In
own.
later years, there used to be the laws against shchita because the Jews would have to give the tribe animals so that to sell it below market values.
But I just want to understand the pshat here. What's the pshat? In other words, that's midah keneged midah, something like that. In other words, Jews have a mitzvah. You're supposed to give the kohanim the gifts.
So that's interesting.
They were
vegetarians. They banned the consumption.
Hold on, but we're not. But I don't even. We're going to get there in a second. First, I want to understand the base level of the Gemara. The base level of the Gemara is mida keneged mida. You do something inappropriate, so you get punished in that way. You don't take care of the meat. You don't give the meat to the Kohanim, so you're not going to get meat. In other words, you're thinking on a metaphysical level, right? So that's one thing that's going on. You could do that with each of these three cases. But look at the second one. What's the second one? Again, we don't know exactly what it means by B'nei Tefillah, but again, the Jews are not sufficiently careful about Tefillah, presumably women, right? And because of that, there's now a gezerah, which is mida keneged mida, as an einish, that the bathhouses are closed down. Okay. Similarly, they are digging up the bodies from the cemeteries. Why? Mida keneged mida, because the Jews are happy on the Zoroastrian holidays, right? They're going to the Christmas market and they're enjoying and celebrating. So because of that, because of joy, there's a gezerah that makes them upset. So that's the base level of what's going on. What's amazing about this Gemara, though, is that with each of these cases, you could also understand the Zoroastrian logic. Why they're making these gezerahs. The first one has to do with a gezerah against meat. We have texts from the Persians that complain about the Jews. One of the things they complain about the Jews is shchita. They say that shchita is a travesty. The blood is falling on the ground. It's contaminating the earth, something they were actually very, very concerned with. They felt like the earth was sacred, as we'll see in the third case also. And they felt that the animals needed to be respected properly. And they thought the proper respect of the animals is by stunning them. That's how you're supposed to do it, and then strangling them. You're supposed to strangle them. That's the proper way to respect the animals. And look at these Jews, they're doing shchita. So from the Zoroastrian logic, they're saying, you're out, right? No more meat for you. That's number one. Number two, they make a gezerah against closing down the bathhouses. What's wrong with the bathhouses from a Zoroastrian perspective? So we mentioned that they're very concerned about the animals, the cows, not that different, by the way, even from the Indians. Many, many millennia ago, the Zoroastrians, the Iranians, and the Indians were...
The Aryans.
The Aryans, they were from the same. So that's in terms of that. The second one, though, why would they close down the bathhouses? Because the Zoroastrians worshipped water. They felt that water needed to be protected from impurities, and because of that, we even have Christian texts that complain about the fact that the Persians are closing down the bathhouses. They can't have their bathhouse culture because the Persians felt that the way that Jews and Christians and non-Zoroastrians are treating the water is without respect. They might go to the bathroom in the bathhouse. They might do all kinds of things that are going to contaminate the water. And because of that, they say, we're closing the whole thing down.
How did they wash?
So they first. So that's a good question. No. So they talk about that problem. They would first purify themselves. It's a little gross with a kind of urine, right? They call it gomez from a cow or something like that. They put a little on. From that perspective, they would see themselves as now pure. And then you can come into contact with them. You can't exactly. You can't just walk in and
mikveh culture. They were against mikveh culture.
Exactly. But the third thing. What's the third thing? Why were they digging up the bodies? And you mentioned before this conversation that the Gemara reports between the Chachamim and the kings. The kings want to know kfurim in a Torah minai, and how do you know that you're supposed to bury? I mean, what does the king care about the Jewish source of Kfura? Because they were very against Kfura. Has anyone ever traveled to Mumbai, to Bombay?
They burned.
One of the not burning. That's the Hindus. The birds.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's still, they don't use it anymore, but in Bombay, it's one of the tourist sites. There's this huge structure that's called the Tower of Silence. And they would lay out the bodies, and the bodies would be consumed by the birds, And that way, and then they would take the bones, they would put them in an ossuary, which is a box for bones, and that you could put into the ground, but you couldn't just put the decaying body, because they were also concerned with the purity and the sacredness of the ground. So it's a great example, this Gemara, how it's operating on two levels. Number one, just a basic understanding of midah keneged midah. You're not mekayim the mitzvahs, so the punishment is going to be opposite that. But also, it reflects an understanding, I think, that these are things that the Zoroastrians are going to care about. Okay.
What does it have to do with Nashas Samaychim B'Yom Eidam?
No,
Because I think it's the opposite. We're happy. Oh, that.
Yeah.
That's not in terms of.
No, I'm saying if their concern was because they're putting the bodies in the ground, why is the reason?
No, but in each of these cases, the three reasons are the midah keneged midah, the metaphysical reason,
okay.
right? But that's not how the Zoroastrians saw. The Zoroastrians are going after. The Zoroastrians are going. It has to work with their logic, because they're not just going to.
Okay.
They have so there. It's simply you're burying bodies. They need to be uprooted. There's a. That seems to be so. That's one.
Is it supposed to say Sasanian?
Yeah, there's a typo. Okay, so that's one section that I wanted to kind of get through. We're doing actually pretty well. You really scared everybody, or
you're very good teacher. No?
So on the one hand, we have a certain set of relationships with the kings. On the other hand, we have a different relationship with the Persian priests. I wanted to take a test case. And here there's another typo. When I was copying and pasting, everything kind of fell out, but I think I remember the line that's missing. I want to take a test case of an area of halacha, which by definition is about the public domain. Okay, there are many areas of halacha that are about the public domain. Eruv and Eruvin, there's interesting things in Eruvin, by the way, when it comes to Zoroastrians here and there. But also Hashavas Aveda. Hashavas Aveda takes place usually in the public domain. You need to be able to return the objects that are found in the public domain. What happens when there are different actors that are interested in how these things work? So it'll take some time. I think it'll just be enjoyable to learn these sugyas, but there's also some interesting points we can make about the Persian context. Okay, so first we have a brisa. Tana Rabbanan B'Rishona Kol Mi Shemotzi Aveda Machar Zaleh Shlosh Regalim V'Achav Regel Achad Shavas Yom Gedei She'elech L'Beis Shlosha V'Yachzer Shlosha V'Yachros Yom Echad. Okay, so the first thing is, back in the day, it doesn't say exactly when, but we can assume for the next line that when the Beis Hamikdash is around, does anyone remember where they would announce it from?
The
Even Atoyim, right? This is the site where people who lost things would go to. So it used to be, the way you would do it is, you're talking about things that are lost in Yerushalayim, or not, maybe, actually. This is the one time we have all the Yidden together, so theoretically, that's the best place to make an announcement, and that would be sort of the ideal. And that brisa, by the way, seems to be explaining, it's also in the Tosefta, what's going on in the Mishnah, the first Shita. Second stage is, the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed. One of the results of the Beis Hamikdash being destroyed is you don't have one place that everyone comes together. So now it's not ideal, but you think, okay, what's the next level public place that Jews could be found in? Okay, so the local shuls and Batei Medrash, that's where you're going to be able to make an announcement. But cryptically, the brisa says, "Mishirabu hanasim hiskinu sheyehei modi l'shcheniv l'miyoda v'dayu." Once the anasim, the people who force, increase, so then they make a new takana that you should just share the word with the people that you know. Thank you. Just 4 words after that. People that you know, and word of mouth, it'll get out. So first of all, the Gemara is going to ask in a second, my Mishirabu, and Nasam, those are the words that fell off the handout. But even before the Gemara asks, what do you think Pshat is? What would be, especially if we're thinking of Eretz Yisrael, first stage, Beis Hamikdash, Second stage, no longer Beis Mikdash was destroyed in the local Schultz, and then you have some kind of new crisis. What would you
The
think?
state thinks it belongs to them. Any lost item has to be returned
We'll get to the state in a second. Before you already know the Gemara.
That's all kind of zocken. Like Sekrik whatever.
Exactly. So Hadrian, I mean, this is like there were different levels of crisis that we experienced. It wasn't just carbon bias. That's 70 C. And then another 60 years or so later, we had another hit, Bar Kochba, after that. And we have Gemaras that talk about all kinds of gezeros that happened specifically during that time, not during the first revolt. So I think one way of reading that brisa, I mean, the Gemaras can understand it differently. And in fact, it's very unusual how the Gemara understands it. But one way of reading the brisa is that this is the third stage, and now you can't do mitzvahs. This is perceived to be a mitzvah according to this brisa, and just like the same way you can't do milah, or they're not letting you do milah. So there's Shabbos, right? There's a whole list of these things. So there's two also. The only thing you can do is just secretly tell your friends about this Aveda.
They banned Hashavas Aveda, even though
I think that's one way of understanding the brisa. That's not how the Gemara understands it. The Gemara says, "My misharabu hanasim," and its answer is Da'amri. Sorry, there is more of a line. Da'amri avidata l'malka. Right? They say that the Aveda goes to the king. Okay. So I think this is what's your name again? Mati said. So I said Reb Mati.
He didn't.
That there's some kind of interest of a body that's forcing things to go a certain way, and that's causing problems, and therefore just keep them out of it, right? Then we have a story. I don't think we'll have time to go through all the Kisvei Yad here, but maybe we'll get to make a few points. Either Ravami, Ravasi, Ashkech Arnika Dinari. Okay, so we have a story. He finds a wallet of money. Chaziyahu Roma'ah, maybe that's how to read it. So a certain Roman sees him. He's like, doesn't know what to do, right? Should he take it? Should he not take it? Amrlei shkol datach, take it for yourself. Lav parsayanan damri avidat lamalka. We are not like the Persians that say that the lost object goes to the king. So first of all, there's something very unusual with this Gemara, which is worth pointing out, that my misharebu anasim damri avidat lamalka. And then we have a story that tells us that Avidat Malka is a Persian thing. So it's just unusual that the Brisa, which is so, you feel it's located in Eretz Yisrael, I mean, the corporate bias and all these things, is being applied to something that's at least associated with. It seems like it was Persians.
This is brought. It's the old Medrash on Alexander Moiten, the same exact thing.
It's the next piece.
The Greek.
The next piece in the Yerushalmi.
But it seems like it was a big legal discussion at the time.
Yes.
It was a new concept. And the Persians had one way of thinking, and the Romans had a different way of thinking.
So maybe we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. But
we have a problem anyway, because like you started the discussion, you said the public domain, you find a property. There's also goyim that the wallet can belong to. You know.
So it's a perfect test case where you have all these actors that you have to negotiate with in some way. But also, what's also interesting about it is that we have the three main actors from this perspective. You have the Jews, right? And the Chachamim are very interested in halacha and how the law needs to be practiced. Then you have one empire. I mean, you could almost use this picture, right? You have, on the one hand, you have these Greeks, right? In this case, Romans. On the other hand, you have the Persians, and you have the Jews mixed in. So it's the story is a very powerful story that kind of brings these three.
It tells you that the Romans are better.
Well, who tells you that the Romans are better?
Himself.
The Gemara doesn't. The Gemara reports that who tells us the Romans? The Romans tell us.
Saying it's ridiculous, this Persian idea. Keep it for yourself.
But the Gemara feels it important to write down that the Romans are in some ways better.
It looks like he was an anomaly. It was not the standard.
You're saying he was a good Roman.
Yeah, because you see Ravasi, as soon as he saw a Roman, he had a true story.
Not always agenda.
Most of them.
Yeah, it could be.
We always say things in some agenda.
It could be. I personally, though, I'm very skeptical of a Roman telling me that the Romans have it right. But I'm open. Because obviously he would say that. And why not just say, take it for yourself?
Why should say it's not like a Persian when we're talking about Ami and
Because it was a big polemus.
and
It
there's
was a
nothing
big
to do with
polemus
the
thing.
Persians.
No, so this is happening in Eretz Yisrael. This is
Saying the
definitely,
Bamis and it's
yeah, Ravasi also.
Yeah, so why does she think? Why should he mention the Persians at all?
Exactly. So there's something that says,
Okay.
By the way, I mean, if you look at the Kisvei Yarim, Chazia Hu Ma'ah, there are different possibilities, and one way of reading it is that he sees, the Chacham sees the Roman, see him, seeing. In other words, there's a lot of gazes that are going back and forth. It's not just. I mean, you could read this, and by the way, but another Gemara, number 10. Where someone finds it's a very similar pattern. Okay, it's a very specific case in Elam Mitzias. He finds something. Also,
Here's in Bavli.
This is in Bavel. Comes in front of Rav. Rav tells him, you can take it yourself. No problem. Same way of phrasing it. He sees that the man is still, he feels maybe I shouldn't take it. Why not just split it with my son Chia? That way you'll see that I really believe in this psak. I really believe you could take it. Because also it's you're going to split it with my son. It's actually a great story. But one of the things this story can tell us is that when we're trying to get into the head of Rav Asi, of Rav Ami, who's hesitating, maybe the reason he's hesitating at the beginning is because he just doesn't know. It's a certain case, okay, it's Tinari on the one hand. Are they piled, are they not? Is there simon? We don't know. But there's what to hesitate about. And on the one hand, you have Yisalam, you're not allowed to not pick it up. On the other hand, you have all these. And then on top of that, you have this darn Roman who's like looking at you and watching you while you're.
Like there was some trauma involved. Like in
There's
Persia,
some
that people were persecuted. Sorry, in England we say.
Yeah.
That people were persecuted harshly in Persia in these areas. For not giving it to the state.
It could be.
And this was a response. That was the fear.
So yeah.
What was he hesitating? In other words, what is he supposed to do? Leave it on the ground?
Give it for the
I mean, no, but he did, by picking it up, he didn't do anything. I'll do it, I'll go tomorrow to the, I mean, what was the hesitation as far as seeing the Roman?
So the Roman is telling us, and the Gemara is saying that the Gemara seems to be saying that
no, but if you can't make a Shavas Savai, you shouldn't touch it.
Well, so right, exactly. So one thing that I was trying to say is exactly that. There's a halakhic concern, right? Once you pick it up, you're involved, right? I mean, the truth is, can you not pick it up?
Maybe that's
definitely once you make a kinyan, you have to take care of it. Exactly. But the other concern is of Avidat Lamalka, that the king wants you to. Now, it's not just going to be you handed it. I'm sure everyone in this room has had some experience with bureaucracy, and maybe even worse than bureaucracy, that whenever officials get involved, it's a problem. Now, I want to, in the corner, what's your name?
Shaya.
Reb Shaya. You pointed out to a story. There's actually an amazing story about Alexander. I said we would get to Alexander. This basically the same location in the Gemara in the Yerushalmi, the same parak, the same issues are being dealt with. There, though, they tell a story from the reverse perspective, right? So you're in Eretz Yisrael. You're right. I mean, it's a story that takes place long ago, centuries ago, with Alexander. Alexander goes to Katsaya, the edge of the earth, right? And maybe the east, but it doesn't say that, though we have a lot of stories about him going to the east. he says he sees all this. There's lots of gold there. So they try to bring him gold. Alexander comes, you quickly want to pay him off. He says, I don't want gold. I want to see your laws. I came on an exploratory trip. I want to understand how in Ktsaya you do your laws. While they're having the conversation, some guy shows up and he's having a din with his friend. It's actually a great case. He had sold a dump, some kind of like property that had lots of stuff in it. He didn't realize that there was valuable stuff in it. And then his friend, right? So Reuven sells Shimon a dump, and Shimon is digging up in the dump. And he finds a treasure of coins. What's the machlokas? Because you're in Ketsaya, it's like Bizarro land. It's the Twilight Zone. Instead of people being greedy, they want to make sure that the other guy gets it. So Reuven, who sold it, said, "Oh, obviously it's yours. You're the owner of the property. You made a Canaan, and that's it." And then the other one says, "No, what are you talking about? I didn't know when I bought it and the price that I paid that there would be. So therefore, you take it. I'll give it back to you." Okay, so you have a problem, right? A problem that we can't really appreciate in our world. But we can imagine a utopia where there's such a problem where everyone wants to make sure the other guy gets it right. So, the question, while they're busy with one another, so the king says to one of them, "Do you have a boy? You have a son?" Yeah, I got one. The Chavri said to Shimon, "Do you have a girl? Do you have a daughter? About Nukva?" Here's the solution. Let's get them married, and this will solve the problem. Now they'll inherit it together. It'll be theirs. It's all good. It's funny. People are laughing. Alexander also laughed. Right? Shari Gachich, he started laughing. Why are you laughing? The king of Katsaya is very nervous. You don't think I judged properly? If this case came in front of you in Macedon, in the Greek world, what would you do? What would I do? I would kill this one, Reuven. I'd kill this Shimon because they're so annoying. They're fighting about these things and then I would take the fortune. Okay, the story goes on. It's an amazing story. It's worth looking at. But you see in the Yerushalmi, right? The perspective is they're telling a story about Alexander coming from the west, going to this far place. In most of these stories, it's to the east. The east is the perfect place where peace and harmony and people, right? By the way, if you look at the verbs that are used to describe like didim, it's one of them is even the same word for marriage. Ultimately, everyone gets married together. It's wonderful. No one's ever fighting. Alexander, though, he comes from the west, and from the Yerushalmi, the west is what they're suffering under. They're still. If Rava said Akate Avadi Dachashverosh, you could say that Israel, we're still servants of Alexander. We're still under the same Roman Greek world, and it's a cruel world, right? This actually in Eretz Yisrael, this is the world where not only this Avedat Malka, but also the people are killed.
But I think neither is a Jewish solution.
Now, what's the Jewish solution?
Neither of it is a Jewish solution.
Correct. Yeah,
it's like
that's a good point.
There's an extreme to that extreme, but it's not us.
The first one is because he said, "Give it to my son half," and they would make a shit.
But that's not. Yeah, but also it's not a Jewish problem either, unfortunately. Yeah. Okay, so let me just So let me just make a quick just to take it back to the Gemara. So the Gemara in the Bavli has it in the reverse perspective. In the Bavli, instead, you have a world where Persia right, is the problem. Even though the story is taking place in Eretz Yisrael, they're suffering. They recognize that they're suffering. How are they suffering? So very quickly, because I want to open the floor. If you look at number 12, this is just a couple of lines from a whole code of Persian law about what to do with lost objects, which they call strays, right? The word strays is like a stray animal, but that's the category for any kind of lost object. And the thing that you must do as soon as you find the lost object is report it to the local leader. So it's not Malka, right? It's not but I mean, that could just be the government.
Exactly. Not like they spoke with Japan.
Exactly. So I think what's going on in the Gemara is it's a recognition of, in the Persian context, that there's a problem that the Persians are so invested. Right? Remember, Shver Malka cares about this machlokas, at least in the way they present it. Possibly like Rabbi Shimon, that sounds all good and well until they also are commanding this. Just you can look at number 11, which interestingly enough, it's part of a long list of stages in the law of treasure, which is basically the same area, very similar to what the Yishalmi talks about. And there they make a big point, just like a Roman. Right, this is from 380. It doesn't work with the years with Bavli, but still, if any person under the inspiration of divine providence, meaning like luck, right, or the leadership of fortune, should find a treasure trove, we allow him to enjoy his fine without fear. The other stages before this, you have to give half to the local authorities. You have to give a third to this one. So they do make a big deal. They're very proud of the fact that we give it to you. It's almost like shkola, take it for yourself.
Finders keepers.
Finders keepers, exactly.
Okay, now we'll open the floor 1 second. We'll open 1 second, and we'll go around. And anyone that has any questions or anything, when we start, I want to ask you 3 things. If you could be mesiachis, I'm sure that we'll hope to have you again. But meanwhile, if you could tell us one. I always say over, but I would like to hear from you if you could tell us what Elman said on Abai Berova about meeting each other. If you remember what he said, if you could say something about that. Then
you're saying whether they actually met each other.
If you could tell us. Second thing is if you could tell us something about I think this is a very major thing, the Sasanian, Zoroastrian hashpua that had about Kishuv, Kishuv, and the third thing is about especially Abaya, but it's not only Abaya, about the refuas that is mentioned in the Bavli that is different than what's mentioned in the Yerushalmi and the Mishnah. That if you know something about the Zoroastrian or Persian influence about that.
Okay, that's a lot. I mean, in terms of, I hope I don't misrepresent him. But in terms of Abai and Rava, I remember him actually assigning me an article by Richard Kalman, which actually the title of the author is whether, I don't remember the exact title, did Abai and Rava know each other? And you go through the examples in that article, and almost every single case, if you're kind of dividing the Talmud de Gemara from what they're saying themselves, that they don't seem to have known each other personally, or they're not engaged in dialogue. And even when it looks like they're engaged in dialogue, it's more of like an amar lach, like, were he to say. So he was skeptical about whether they actually knew each other.
Why? Because the areas are so far?
They're not so far. I mean, if you were going from Eretz Yisrael to Bavli, and we have a nechutai, I mean, we know that you could make it, but it doesn't seem that they actually, despite them being so closely associated, advised to Abai Rafa, he always said it's an intellectual friendship that's lasted. In other words, for us, we put it together, the Gemara put it together, but I remember he was very skeptical about whether they
The Gemara tells a story that his widow, Abai's widow.
So his approach to those stories.
Says,
so that story about Bar Hadaya, that's an amazing story in Brachas, that story is he considered to be a later story that was put together from earlier material, but was not supposed to be historical.
What about the
his
wine?
approach?
I'm talking about the wine.
The wine one.
Yeah, she came, she asked for a kasuba wine. So Rava says, I knew Nachmani, he never drank wine. So he specifically said, I knew Nachmani. It's not like a dialogue. He says,
So I don't know. I don't
I
know.
knew the guy.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
not a drunkard.
Show him knew him. He knew him.
No, he
He knew
said,
because Yaakov
but he knew to the extent that he rejects the ksuba.
Yes.
Based
Yeah,
on
yeah,
Once
yeah.
they met. He said once they met.
Yeah.
From that he knew he's not a drinker. I mean,
That's a good.
Why
Why this question? Was this something that you were discussing?
No, because it's always like,
Yeah.
I was curious if you knew that.
No, but you're right about that. But his point was, it's the Gemara Ksubas where he had to figure out how much wine she normally drinks. Okay, the second.
They both went to the same
So he said that was not a historical story. That's his general approach to stories was that the stories were not there to tell us history, but to tell us values and narratives. It's not historically true.
True. Now you see. Now you
It's
have
not
to.
his point was
Now you have
always.
to give a definition. What does it mean? True.
His point was always historically factual. It's not historically factual. Yeah. The second question was about Kishuf.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question. I mean, one of the
Kishuf, Shaidem, all these beliefs.
yeah. So on the one hand, you see that it's not true, by the way, that in the Yerushalmi and Eretz Yisrael you don't have Shadim. You all know there's plenty of midrashim about Shadim.
Right.
There does seem to be more of an interest in Shadim in the Bavli. So one theory is that part of the Zoroastrian dualism is that not only do they have a good god and a bad god, but the good god and the bad god have armies. The good God has the equivalent of angels, some kind of forces for good, and the bad God has demons. Those are the forces of evil. So the theory was, and if you look in Zoroastrian writings, they're very interested in the role that demons play in all kinds of things. Why does a body, rot after it's dead?
More
Because
than the Romans and the
yeah, much more. It was theologically important for them to explain the world. Disease, all these things were like demons and were part of the side of evil, and we need to defeat it by bringing life into the world, all this kind of stuff. On the other hand, the kind of demons that we have in the Bavli, many of them are fun demons. In other words, they're characters. They play tricks. Sometimes you want to avoid them.
Some of them are cute. Some of them are really cute.
Yeah.
So it's. I think the answer is that yes, the Zoroastrians were invested in demons, but a lot of the demons that show up in the Bavli are not Zoroastrian demons. They're part of a much older group of demons that also show up in something called the magic bowls, which, by the way, I would be thrilled to talk about the magic bowls. These are something like kameyas that were written. I don't know if people have seen them in
It's also
museums.
only in Babylonian.
Those were only made, and they've only survived in Bavel in that form. You have parallels, though, in Eretz Yisrael.
I wasn't asking just for the
They just found
Persian culture.
posted more.
So that was a very old view.
This week they found
the Maskilim, actually, when they tried to discredit the Gemara. So like, what's his name?
Persian.
And Hamelitz in the 18th. He would say, why should we care about the Gemara? It's filled with these demons, and the demons come from Persian influence. I think he overdid it.
And argue against it. What are you saying?
I think that a belief in demons was widespread and had a certain characteristic in Bavel, in Bavel and Persia, but it's also in Eretz Yisrael, and I don't know why we have to say it comes from the outside.
And about refuahs, yes.
Refuahs, yes. I mean, in my book in Nida, I came across evidence that they knew certain ideas that were coming actually from the Greek world, but specifically into Bavel. So Galen is one of the most important physicians in late antiquity. He had a very unusual view that saw that not only do men have zera, but also women have a kind of zera, and that kind of zera is very, very similar to menstrual blood. So I argue that whole sugya of dam chimud, which is a nightmare of a sugya, and it could be a halachic nightmare, because if you think about it, right, it's a big machlokes, is it tar or is it tameh, but if it's tameh, so I think it does reflect, and we have Zoroastrian texts as well that describe some kind of dam chimud, and I think that's just one example. Many. I mean, the refuah's subject is a big one.
I'm going to go this side now. Sure.
Yes, I have a few comments. First about you said about the Shirva, Maichem Yom Aydam.
Yeah.
So all these ancient cultures, including the Zoroastrians, had a Day of the Dead, like you have in Mexico or something. So maybe it's referring to that specific Yom Idam.
That's interesting.
So maybe
They had 5 days. I mean, they had a problem with their calendar. Calendars are always a problem if they're monthly calendars. We have, second Adar. They had this thing where every year they would have 5 days that were at the end of the calendar that didn't even get a month. And those 5 days were kind of days of the dead. So it's possible that would be, that's very interesting, that would be the connection.
the other thing about Dora Europa's picture.
Yeah.
We know even from medieval painters, when they wanted to paint Jews from antiquity, biblical figures, they would take Jews that lived amongst them. That's
model.
how historians know how Jews were dressed in medieval times. So that artist was looking at nobles. He was imagining Persian nobles with togas because that's the nobles he knew. So it doesn't have any.
It's possible.
Any hidden messages. Probably a noble is a noble.
Yeah, it's just that in that picture, it's very striking because on the one hand, everyone else is dressed in one way or another like Persian. And in the middle, though,
this is what I said. The Persian king in this picture doesn't look like a Persian king with this headdress and this.
He doesn't have like what you find in the coins, but he does have Persian dress. At least I'm not an expert. But this guy...
He's saying, where's the beard? They were leaving the hair.
It looks different.
When Shopper got up to Shemaim, they asked him, Shopper, where's your
funny headdress, they had this king doesn't look like that.
So he doesn't look, you're right. I'm sorry, what's your name?
Zalman.
You're right that he doesn't look like what we call the, iconographic, stylized version of the king. So let's say you see on the coins or even on the reliefs on the rocks.
Right.
But it's possible that in this form of art, and like I said, if you look also at the church, but it's an interesting point in terms of...
Anyone decide?
Any specific halachic consequence, like you don't please their Hanukkah, the inside, anything related to specific Zaydas and the...
So that's, so Yaakov Elman actually argued, I don't know if it's true, but he suggested that the Shai Secunda, which is the language that's used about Ner Hanukkah, was specifically about Zoroastrians, and the Gemara basically says this.
Sounds like
the Gemara basically the reason
light.
the Gemara talks about. I mean, it's a whole sugya with muktzah. When can you move it and how can you move it? And he talks about an amgusha coming in and taking away.
What was the consequence? Why was that a problem?
Because this is a good question. The same reason that the fact that they cared about the water and they cared about the ground, they were very careful about fire. They were obsessed with fire.
But how can you be obsessed?
And they thought, and we also have Christians.
Yes, the Aryans, the Nazis, everything was light, flame.
That's not a real concept. I mean, it's linguistic.
Tzimtzum Ein Shalosh. Chama Mamat Shabbos.
Specific rituals?
Yeah, they were specific rituals. To this day, by the way, there is not far from
the Purim ritual to dance over the fire.
That's also possible. In Spring Valley, right next to Spring Valley, there is a Zoroastrian community. And everyone know where Pomona, New York is? In Pomona, New York, there is a Zoroastrian community that has a fire temple inside. Okay? I once brought my students to just have a conversation with the community. I was teaching a course about Zoroastrianism, and I said, ask them questions. So they said, what do you think about conversion? When they started talking about the difficulties of building a fire temple and working with fire code in the city, I said, this is where religion really happens. I said, think about Eruvin, like you're trying to figure out with the city officials. They have tons of rituals.
But how realistic is it that they controlled fire? Fire was the basic need for food, for light, for everything.
They couldn't really, obviously.
So why
but when you had a fanatical priest, and he saw not only that Jews had fire because you needed a light.
Because he used it for ritual, maybe.
For ritual, maybe.
They had an issue with Hanukkah candles.
So that's a good point.
Anyone else here?
Yes.
Zooming in,
Yeah.
I think we're going to touch on it a little bit more. Were there different Jews thinking differently about the Persian
I think so. Yeah.
I'm saying we see a lot of them pro. Like we had that a little bit with the Romans.
So one way, one thing you find. So we mentioned Shmuel says Dina de Mechusadina, right? So he seems to have a certain way of thinking, and all these stories with Shmuel Malka. What's Rav's response? I mean, in a number of cases. First of all, he says there's a Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Ayin Hey, says Hello minha Amgusha, right? Chayv Misa. So he was not friends. He was not friends, and he even mourned the loss of the last Persian king. There's a Gemara that says, first it's about Rebbe Antoninus, and when Antoninus dies, he says Nisparta Chavila, and Rav says about Artavan, which is the name of the Artavan, the name of the last Parthian king. He said Nisparta Chavila. In other words, it seems that there's a view reflected there that there's a problem with these new Persian kings. And that's just one example in terms of politics. But the Sasanians. Seems to be.
It seems like
anyone
different rabbis support different candidates.
Maybe.
I'm curious if there's any evidence where the Persian law made itself into halacha in Kinyuna Mechosh Mishpah, just like the Roman law. Like, is there like a lot of work?
Okay, so here's an example.
I'm trying to ask, just like
Mamash Lashta and other
Greek Roman law we have today, a lot of precedents.
So Matan al-Manas lahachzir is one interesting. This is Elman's, and there's a big sort of debate about whether this works or not. But he suggested that you only find the real development of Matan al-Manas lahachzir in the Bavli. You have the beginnings of it in the Tosefta, but it only really happens in the Bavli, and it happens obviously. And things we're very familiar with. We just had sukkahs, right? So there's this obsession. You give it to your kid, right? So that there's already a story. That's already in the Tosefta where you have, there's some. You have to read it carefully, but you have a bunch of chachamim. They're on the boat. They only have one raminim, so they have to go from one to the other, and then. It only works if you're So that's one area for
the term autonomous lahachzir we don't find by the Tanam. The term.
Correct.
The term we find in the Bavli.
Yeah.
And what his tradition is.
So that it might have come from Persian law, which is very invested and supports the idea, develops even the idea that you can really, really, really own something, even if built into the contract is that you're going to return. He also, another example, even in terms of marriage.
Right, not even.
They were talking about marriage. Mm-hmm. They have, part of their fight against evil.
In American law, there's also such a concept because when you need to have ownership for responsibility, it's okay if it's just like nominal ownership as long. Because it creates a responsibility. What?
But in Persian law, they're most interested in this question of like temporary ownership about a woman, and specifically if you had because they were religious, they wanted to make sure that the world was populated by people. Okay, so part of fighting on the side of good is make sure you have a lot of kids. So if you had a barren couple. There was a way to officially have her, right? It sounds crazy.
Sperm donation.
No. For a year with this man,
Not only. Right, Matan al-Manas lahachzir, she's temporarily with this person, but ultimately she's with the person anyway.
Okay.
But Elman pointed out that there is a Gemara. Where Chachamim say, "Man havi li liyom." Who will be mine for a day? Right? What does that even mean for a day? Exactly. When he goes to a certain place. So he suggested that maybe it's sort of based, obviously that's a woman who's already married, but it's based on this idea that you can construct a kinyan that built into the kinyan is the temporality.
Is there any theological? I'm very curious about Hashavas Aveda and the finders keepers.
Yeah.
Is there any theological background to different approaches in it?
Or theological to Hashavas Aveda?
To finders keepers or giving it to the state? Or is it just a plain civil?
Not that I saw. But you say just plain civil, correct. You say just plain civil, The interesting thing is, unlike Roman law, where the Roman jurists who were in civil law were not priests and were not involved in rituals.
Functionaries.
If you look at the names, the people who were involved in civil law in the Persian side, they're the same ones who are involved with,
doctrine.
Hilchos Tumavatara, their Hilchos Tumavatara. So they don't explicitly talk about it, but it's there.
About the painting, you see the Greeks in the painting.
Yeah.
In Pompeii,
Yeah.
the Roman city Pompeii, there's a painting from the Toda Bashlomo Melech with the baby, two women, and on the side is also like a few Greeks looking in. So
Interesting.
could be it's like a style.
Phenomenal.
Interesting.
Observing the law,
It
no?
seems like it was a big polemic between the systems of law.
Also, I'm wondering what your opinion is about the legend that Hinnebanussen's daughter married into the Sasanian Empire, and what we can learn about the view on intermarriage from this story.
So I have a friend who I think you showed me his book, Simcha Gross. Simcha Gross thinks that story, which shows up in a Persian text, was invented, and it was invented maybe by people who had an interest, like the Reish Galusa, of showing that there's an alliance. The fact that it doesn't show up until many, many centuries later and only in that text, he doesn't think it's historical, but it was just part of a way of the Reish Galusa saying we're connected. That's his. It's a great article. I could send it to you. That's his.
Maybe Motchan was asking, there's a lot of these gemuras. I mean, the big question about influence and where they're living in is understanding if there's something that's apologetic about what the gemura is doing.
Yeah.
And I know that there was this Lillenbaum, the Chavetzian person, that he wrote against the Amailets. And he used to bring out the point about a few of these gemuras. He says, if we have a halacha that avoid, let's say, Gzailas Akim is Usa or Avodas Akim is Mitta, our basis for it is to say, listen to me, they're taking it away anyhow. So it's not so bad that we say Avodas Akim. If you want to say oil of Akim is Ayin Matama, listen to me, they don't have Klira anyhow. So a lot of these gemuras and the stories are in apologetic context to it.
Yeah.
And that's why we need that gemura. So it's not so much that they were living under that time, it's just that we can't in the time. The big question about all this thing is they were living amongst these people. How other were they from us? So the context is that these give us light on what they were dealing with to explain why we live differently. So it's not that why we're the same. Why we're differently.
That's definitely part of it.
Let me ask a question. Isn't the story with Alexander just a way to downgrade how Alexander dealt with law? Because otherwise, why would we want to
What's
kill
funny about it, though, is if you look at where it is in the Yerushalmi, and even in terms of what you just said, there's, even though it's a whole thing of Avedas Akum, there they go out of their way to say, but still, if Nimishur Sadin, we need to. So within the context of that sugya, it's very weird that they'd be downgrading the whole.
Why do we want to kill two people?
Because he's a crazy.
So because he
they want to make fun of it. The whole point of this story is that even though
he's just taking the Veda, he's going to kill the two people.
He's the polar opposite of.
Was there a time? Was there a progression of people being Zoroastrian, but really being enlightened and not just claiming to be Zoroastrians, but similar to now in America, that everyone is Christian but they're non-believers?
I mean, nowadays.
Why you ask the question?
And there's a possibility that many kings claim to be Zoroastrians.
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Like the Russian emperor trying to please the church.
Or to use, definitely.
Trump, maybe.
Again,
Catholic.
you never really know. This is always, you never really know what's in their
and
art.
Even in the priests, there was priests that were fanatics that came to power from one time to time, a new priest, a new pope that was really a fanatic, a true believer.
Correct.
And then there were
times but in terms of Shvor Malka,
no, you did.
Shvor Malka, there's evidence that
you do write in your book, or you are simple that this is what you want to give the terms of Chayvarim as the fanatics, because the Gushas are not the fanatics.
That's true. But in terms of the kings, we know that there were other groups that were competing for the king, and Shvor Malka the first had this person named Mani who founded this religion, Manichaeism, who wrote a book dedicated, it's called Shaburagan, it's 2 Shapor, to say this is my religion and you should accept it and it'll be useful for you, because his religion brought from the Buddhists and it brought from the Zoroastrians.
Like kings in India that were competing
exactly.
with Muslim or Hindu.
So I think there are always they're not just pious, kings. They're always using religion as kings have always used it.
Truthfully, we don't know much.
Religion was always used. Okay,
theology.
so 1 second. Someone else here?
Chavorim, I'm not.
Second. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. And we hope to come back again.
Yes, I had a great time.
You lit a fire in us.